as someone familiar with kind of water quality and environmental chemistry questions, I started studying PFAS thinking like, oh, it can't be that bad.
The chemical that can be harmful to your health is found in water in 43 states.
Better things for better living through chemistry.
So what's happening with this chemical now, and why was DuPont allowed to dump so much of this chemical into our air and our waterways?
You should just, come on. Oh, there's my muffins.
Cooking without Teflon just isn't any fun. Non-stick Teflon, only by DuPont.
And the longer I'm in this line of work, I kind of see that, yeah, it really is that bad. PFAS chemistries are unique compared to a lot of other types of pollutants that we've wrangled with in the past. There are a number of differences between some of these PFAS in that they accumulate in living organisms a little bit differently, but they all have something in common. They all rely on this carbon-fluorine bond that is indestructible in nature, essentially. So what may start as a chemical in your pizza box then ends up hundreds of thousands of miles away in the liver of a tern. That says something about how these compounds are getting to our kind of like pristine and remote oceanic environments, unfortunately. All of the PFAS that's ever been made still exists, and it's making its way to the ocean. Humans get most of their dietary PFAS from seafood products. The ocean is the sink for these compounds, and so seafood is rife with these chemicals. So that is the number one reason why we care about looking into PFAS in the oceans and in seabirds, because we're getting a pulse on PFAS that we're exposed to through our use of seafood. So the point of regulating these compounds is promising in that we already have data showing that regulating these works and starts to phase them and lower them in our environment. I guess that's like hopeful, but also like a little bit of a call to action in that you have to do it right if you want there to be a noticeable impact of them. The effects of PFAS in wildlife are kind of hard to pin down. There's a lot of questions already about there's so many stressors facing wildlife. They can't take a questionnaire and tell you like, oh yeah, I was in this place or I ate this thing. So it's really hard to understand what is causing adverse effects in those creatures. Birds with higher PFAS are generally in worse body condition. They have lower organ weights, different size wings and beaks than birds with less PFAS. Again, those are correlations, so it's hard to exactly pin down the mechanism there. But some of these observations have now started to be identified in bird populations around the world. So within our most recent work, we looked at 3 populations of birds. I studied great shearwaters from Massachusetts Bay, herring gulls from Narragansett Bay, sandwich terns, laughing gulls, royal terns, and brown pelicans from the Cape Fear River estuary in North Carolina. They were different species, but they're kind of similar in life history strategy, meaning that they're opportunists and generalists that rely on forage fish. Some populations specialize in relying on human discards. If we want to know what's in the ocean, let's sample something that relies on the ocean, like a seabird. So we used some basic correlation measures to figure out what was related to PFAS levels in these birds. And we found that lipid levels in the bird livers were negatively related to PFAS levels, meaning as PFAS increased, the fat levels went down. Fat dynamics in wildlife is like numero uno for fitness and function. Wildlife rely on finely tuned fat stores to migrate, to reproduce, to kind of carry about their daily lives and continue to carry on their species. knowing that we now have chemicals that are impacting the way that they store and use fat, at least in one organ, that's a big deal that has implications for their very existence as a trans-equatorial migrant. The other important thing about seabirds is a lot of them are really long-lived, so they incorporate these periods of growth and reproduction and old age that kind of mirror how a human deals with pollutants. And so seabirds are also incorporating those kind of complex life stages, so they're a good way to kind of understand what ocean exposures are possible in a vertebrate organism. These chemical stressors are impacting resiliency of wildlife populations, and that's important because we're in the midst of a biodiversity crisis. And so right now we're in a global pandemic that is very likely the result of an imbalance and interruption of biodiversity, which should be keeping some of those pathogens and other sort of invaders and microbes at bay. We've messed with that. And so when we continue to mess with the food web and its ability to self-regulate itself, we end up paying the price.